Okay, so welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk about patent and latent defects, stigmatized properties, and disclosures. And to some, it might sound like a boring topic. I know, like I said, when we do lead generation or how to get more business, it sounds more exciting. But these are really important topics that you guys have to cover. They save you from RICO pitfalls and complaints you guys can get in the future. So definitely tune in, or I hope a lot of you watch this video back. It's just really good for compliance. And it can get to be a pretty interesting topic. So I'm going to share my screen here. I don't know if you guys know the difference between patent and latent defects. So we're going to go over that first. Where am I here on my Google Drive? So for instance, if I were to show you a picture like this, what would you guys say? Is that a patent or a latent defect? Does anybody know?
Patent.
Right? Sorry?
Patent.
Patent. Very good. Okay, so this is just a really good visual. This is a patent defect. It's something you can see, right? So I'm just going to go and do my share here for my document. I like to do a good visual because some people can't get their mind around it, I find, when I go over this subject. Patent defect, patent and latent defects, and caveat emptor. That's what we're going to talk about. Defects are regarded as being two kinds, latent or patent, okay? Patent defects are those that can be discovered by inspection and ordinary vigilance as part of the purchaser, on the part of the purchaser. With respect to these, the ordinary rule is caveat emptor, buyer beware, right? So there are things that you can walk into the property and see. So mold on the ceiling, chips in the paint, maybe a little bit of, bubbling. So it looks like there might have been water damage, in the paint, if something bubbling down the wall, wet carpet you're stepping on. So even though you can't see it, it's physically there and you're stepping on it, you can definitely notice it when you're walking through the property with your client. Okay. Latent defect are those which would not be revealed by an inquiry or reasonable inspection, which a purchaser is in the position to make before entering contract, okay? So then we go on a little bit further with our disclosures. So when we have defects, patent or latent, oh, there we go, another person entering the room. When we have defects, patent or latent, okay, what is our job to disclose as agents, right? So patent defect disclosure. A vendor is not under any obligation to disclose a patent defect because a purchaser could or should have detected the defect by doing a reasonable investigation of the home, unless asked specifically. So if somebody says, hey, I noticed there was a little bubbling in the paint there. Did they have a leak? You can't say, oh, no, they didn't. If you're asked specifically, you have to answer the question directly, and it's a patent defect. So you should say, oh, I don't know. They should know that themselves. It looks like water damage. It's obvious. You're not. If you're asked directly as an agent, you have to answer honestly and disclose it. Fraudulent, where the vendor makes efforts to conceal a patent defect in order to mislead a purchaser or lull their suspicions. This action may be considered fraudulent. So you can do nothing in a sale to help hide these patent defects, right? A latent defect. Likewise, if a vendor was aware of a latent defect and failed to disclose it, this may be construed as a misrepresentation and give a purchaser a legal right to recover against the vendor. If known to the vendor, must disclose. So you have to do a little bit of your research here, but you're going to ask your client questions like, is there anything concerning I should know about the house when you're listing a property? And if they say to you, oh, you know what, every now and then when it rains really, really hard, the basement leaks, but it's summer now, so please don't disclose that. You will get into trouble going forward. I always tell my vendors, even when they're really nervous about disclosing something, it's always better to disclose upfront, because you'll find the buyers that are willing to deal with these problems, like, oh, no problem, I'll do a dig, or I'll, waterproof the basement and it'll be fine going forward. And it's way better scenario than dealing with it after the fact. So after the fact, if they find that you haven't disclosed this and you're fully aware of it because they've lived at the property 20 years and even the neighbors know that it leaks because they've complained to the neighbors before, then you're going to run into a problem not only as the agent, but your seller's going to run into some problems as well. And if we have time, I do have some articles I can go over where I can show you where agents and sellers have gotten into trouble for not disclosing things like this, right? So as agents, how do we do our due diligence? How do we protect our buyers, right? So when we protect our buyers, we're doing the property walkthrough and visit the property at various times. So this is important. And I know it's hard sometimes because we visit a property once and then we're putting an offer in on it. Right. But if you suspect that there's something wrong, and you went on a really, really sunny day and there's a water problem and it's raining the next day, maybe it's a good time to take a quick peek visit back. Right. Speak to the seller representative is not enough, because as we can do our due diligence at the end of the day and we can show that we asked our clients everything that we could ask, but very often we find that our clients don't disclose to us information. Sorry, does someone have a question here? What happens if the seller doesn't disclose? I was just going to say that. Absolutely, Paul. So speaking to the seller representative is not enough because our clients don't always disclose to us, but we are going to have to show that we did our due diligence somehow by asking them these questions. Now, I know it's very difficult because you can say you asked them. I try to have most of these conversations over text or email with my clients. Once I know they're signing with me, is there anything concerning about the property you'd like to tell me? No. Right? You want to get something. Always try to capture something in writing, especially if I suspect that there's a problem. So I want to say, that I saw that staining in the basement. Was that water damage? Is there a leak? And I definitely try and put something and reduce it to a text or an email to my clients so that I can say I did my due diligence to try and reveal that there was a problem. And it looked like there was a patent defect, and my client told me no. So at the end of the day, we just have to show we did our due diligence. Okay. Hire a competent inspector. So we should never discourage our clients to get an inspector, especially if we suspect there's a problem. And we have our ones that we should use as per RICO. You can't use the same person over and over again. So say that there's this really tough home inspector, but your guy's pretty lax, and you force your client to use your lax guy and he doesn't discover there's a problem. You could still be liable even if you hired a competent inspector. So as per RICO, when we suggest any lawyers, home inspectors, mortgage agents, we should always be giving them 3. So I have an email I send and it's always like, here's 3 guys that I use on a regular basis. Call them, see who you like, and use them. So RICO can't say that I pushed, say, one specific person. So they can't say I forced them to use this home inspector, and that home inspector is, a good buddy of mine or a friend, or definitely known to not reveal the problems there. Google search and neighbors. This is a really, really good one. Okay. Google search will tell you a lot. So for instance, if there was a fire and they're not disclosing it because, we fixed the problem, we cleaned off the brick and we, put new drywall on the inside. We don't know that maybe there was some burnt wire inside or something within the walls that we should be repaired. And now the purchaser goes and the house burns down, or God forbid starts another fire. They go on Google search and realize that this house was on fire last summer because there was tenants living in it. Or the neighbor, they move in and the neighbor says to them, hey, is everything good? Did they fix the wall inside after that fire? And the buyer goes, what fire? Right? So it's a good idea to ask Google search, try and talk to the neighbors, try and be chatty, especially now, like I say, with the nice weather outside. If there's someone out on their lawn mowing or something, we tend to talk to the people when we do showings, right? So I go in and I'd say to somebody, oh, good afternoon, nice weather. How's it going? How's the neighborhood? How's this house? These neighbors, are they good? Anything I should know about the property? It's a really good idea to ask these questions because sometimes it'll reveal stuff that the seller maybe is not telling you. Incorporate any representations or warranties that enticed you to purchase the home into your contract of purchase and sale. So if somebody says to you, oh yeah, there was water damage, but we totally fixed it. Okay. I had a property up in Peterborough, which had a similar problem. So they had a water situation and they said, oh no, we 100% fixed it. It's no problem. They had brand new carpeting down. The walls were freshly painted. The only reason we realized there was a water problem is because on the baseboard, you could see that it had a little ripple in it and there must have been some water. And we had a good home inspector who caught that because it looked like a brand new renovation. Their folly was that they didn't buy new baseboard. They just put the old baseboard back on. So we were concerned about this. And even though we had the home inspection, we brought it to their attention. They said, oh no, it's completely fixed. Whatever it was, they parged it, they fixed it. They put the drywall back up and they put the brand new carpeting down. My buyer moves in, and right enough, the fall comes and she has water problems in her basement. All the brand new carpeting is getting wet. So they were lucky because I had them reduce it to writing. I said, well, my client's not going to firm up the sale unless you get your seller to write me an email saying that they fixed it. There's no ongoing problem. There's no problem foreseeable in the near future. And that if there is, it's their responsibility. Right? So reduce it to writing, take that extra step, because it was that extra step that helped my client go back and recoup the damages when she had to replace the carpet and the baseboard. And I think she had to take a chunk up the wall to a certain amount because it was, soaks up the drywall. So definitely get it in writing for your clients. Okay. We have to remember that at the end of the day, we're representing them. They're counting on us to do our due diligence. They don't do this every day. So, somebody might say to them, oh, no, it's not going to be a problem going forward. There's definitely no, it doesn't leak anymore. We fixed it, and a lot of people will just go, okay, great. Because we're expecting people to be honest with us. But because we do this every day, we know that there's not honest people out there. We have to do our due diligence for our clients and get that extra protection for them. Okay. How do we protect our sellers when we're doing a listing? We have to ask our sellers, first of all. And like I say, it's one thing to have a nice conversation with them, but it turns out to be a he said, she said. Although it sounds a little jaded, I always try to reduce things to writing, even if it's shooting them a text, just so they message me back in writing. It's going to be your savior at the end of the day. If anything arises, you could say, no, I asked them. I saw that the paint was bubbling. I asked them if there was a problem, and they said, no, there's no ongoing problem, right? You want to ask your clients if work was done to fix anything and if it was successful. So this is a big one. A lot of people say, oh yeah, no, it was fixed. So if the paint bubbles because there's been a leak and somebody comes in and scrapes that off and does a fresh coat of paint, but it hasn't rained the last couple of weeks, yeah, it was fixed, but we want to know if it was successful, right? Did they do something to fix what was actually the root of the problem? Okay. And always remember, at the end of the day, as the seller representative, if they ask you, should I disclose this? Yes, disclose. Because like I say, going forward, it's better to disclose up front and get the purchaser that will deal with those problems or is aware, because it's much worse when they actually close the property and you have to deal with the buyer after the fact. Just trust me on this. I know a lot of us think, oh, I don't want to tell them that the basement leaks every now and then when in the spring when the snow thaws, right? Or that it really needs this waterproofing done in the house and it's going to kill my sale. I know, but just trust me, it'll kill your sale, having to pay a RICO fine later on. You'll lose all that commission pretty quickly. So disclose. Yes, what's up?
Doesn't this stuff come up when they do an inspection?
Well, okay, this is a good question. Everybody should be getting an inspection, but what's happening right now with our market? Do we get time to do an inspection a lot?
They're not even looking at the property.
They're barely looking at the property. We're going in once quick because we're reduced to half-hour and 15-minute time slots right now. Before we used to get an hour, but with COVID and no double booking, we're reduced to a really, really short time slot. How is 15 minutes or a half an hour a good enough time to take a thorough walk around a house, even as just without an inspector, as myself, to go and look around the house to make sure I'm satisfied with it? We have a pretty good eye for these things because we're agents, right? And we're going in properties every single day, but it's still difficult in that short time period to try and figure out like what's going on in this property,
you
right?
get stuff the first time you see it, just because it's a new place that you're seeing it.
Yeah, exactly. And especially if there's lots of staging and it's pretty and it's very easy to miss these things, right? So like I say, I become jaded. I always look past the stage and I'm like, it's too pretty. What's wrong with it? Let me find something wrong. At least I feel at ease. No property's perfect at the end of the day. So you guys have to remember that, right? You're not doing a bad job to find little things here and there that might need to be fixed by the seller, right? So is everybody good with patent and latent defects? We understand the difference. We understand our duty to disclose. We understand how we can protect our buyers and our sellers. Everybody's good with that. I can move on to stigmas. Yeah. All right. So stigmas are a funny subject. A stigma is not a defect in the ordinary state. Okay. In the context of a real estate, a stigma is a non-physical, intangible attribute of a property that may elicit a physiological or emotional response on the part of the potential buyer. So I know some people are like, what do you mean? Right? Okay. So there may have been an event or circumstance that occurred near oh, hold on, let me get someone in here, that occurred in or near the property that does not affect the property's appearance, function, but might be considered by some emotionally disquieting. Unlike latent or patent defects, which may exist at a property, there is nothing physically observable or measurable associated with a stigma. Okay, let me see here. Somebody's got a question. Also, grow house. Yes, grow house is a huge thing, huge thing. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit because we're going to talk about crimes, right? And I have some examples for sure. Very good question. So the Real Estate Business Brokers Act, REBA, does not define stigma, but examples may include the property was used in an ongoing commission of a crime. So drug dealing, chop shop, brothel, a murder or suicide occurred at the property. The property was previously owned by a notorious individual, organized crime leader, known murderer. There are reports that the property is haunted. A former grow hop, which has been remediated according to the local health or building authority. Okay, so we'll go over these a little bit. Okay, why would it bother somebody if if the property was used in a crime? So if it was a drug dealing or a chop shop or a brothel, who cares? It's not now, right? And it's being sold and they renovated and it's all pretty now. Why would it bother someone going forward? Can we think of different reasons? Yeah, exactly. There might be people that aren't aware the property's changed hands. There could be, people still coming and knocking on the property, looking for drugs, or, somebody coming because they have a beef with somebody in that property. So that might affect and bother people. Yeah.
This is actually, I experienced this once because I was showing a foreclosed, like a property under foreclosure.
Yeah.
And it looked like it was not a very well kept place, like it,
right.
But it's like once we went there, it's like a cop pulled up.
Mm-hmm.
Like after we went inside the house, like
yeah.
the cops knocked on the door and he was like, oh, like asking us questions about like, oh, like have you seen this person of this description and
exactly.
that description and stuff. So
exactly.
I'm sure like that's just from the showing. So I'm sure if you lived there, you would have to deal with that.
That's exactly it. People don't want to have to deal with the aftermath of these situations. Like you say, cops knocking at the door, right? A murder or suicide occurred at the property. So, okay, two different things, I guess. Murder, people would be afraid, whether it was a random act or, a targeted attack, right? So they'd be afraid or maybe not feel safe going forward on the property. I know somebody had sold a house to someone, and I think that there was a mentally challenged family member who came to the house and stabbed the person who was living there. Well, going forward, they caught the person, they put them back in the institution, and like 2 years later, this same mentally challenged person came and was trying to break into that house, right? So the people who had purchased that house going forward now had this same person thinking that his family member still lived there, knocking at the door, right? So definitely a scary thing. Some people don't want to have to deal with that. A suicide at the property might bother some people because some people are superstitious, right? They don't want to deal with that, or for various different reasons, they don't want to deal with the death inside the property, right? Especially when it's an intentional one, right? Not a natural one. But some people are still bothered by natural death, so you have to disclose everything, right? The property was previously owned by a notorious individual. So again, if there's some kind of organized crime or something going on, people are worried about the aftermath. If they purchase this property, are they still going to have, the clientele coming around, or people, enemies of these people? They're concerned. So if you know something, you have to disclose it. There are reports that the property is haunted. So this is a funny one. I actually grew up and my cousins lived on this one street, and there was a big story that house was haunted, and it wasn't sold as far as I can remember my whole childhood. Recently now it's changed hands, I guess, and they fixed it up and they made it a nice property. But this bothers some people, even if it's not true or you don't believe in it, and you don't think ghosts are real. It truly bothers some people for sure. So if it's a house that's notorious and the neighborhood thinks it's haunted, you must disclose it. You have to say, oh, like the neighborhood thinks it's haunted, or there's been like Google reports and stories about it. You definitely have to report it.
Next to a graveyard.
Next to a graveyard. Yeah, but that should be something they should see. That's a latent, that's a patent.
But it does affect it, like, cause let's say the house is
Yeah.
very nice.
Yeah.
And then they didn't notice the
Yeah.
graveyard thing, like it's in the backyard, let's say.
Yeah.
So they didn't really notice until they went to the backyard.
Yeah.
And then they were like, okay, so we're not buying this house.
Exactly. Hi, Julia. I see you have a question. What's up?
Yeah, so that stigma, right? If you don't know about the murder or suicide, we have not disclosed. So what happened then?
Well, the thing is that we should be doing a quick Google search of all our properties, and I've gotten in the habit of doing it. You discover a lot of things, right? So, I mean, if you find when you do a Google search, if there's been a fire, or if, you know, there's claims it's haunted, or definitely like, you know, a suicide happened, it'll be something that's easily find, like you can easily find. Just because everything's online now, even newspaper articles and like, you know, different police reports and different things that, you know, that happen for a property, they'll be up online. So do a quick Google search, you know, and try to show that you did your due diligence. Ask your client for sure if they've lived there for a long time. They definitely know what's going on. Ask the neighbors if you see them outside. Like I said, do anything that is a layer of due diligence for you, but definitely ask your seller. They should know what's going on with their property, right?
How far
In
along?
case,
Well, this is another question. How far along? I've been asked this question a lot. So for instance, like the next one, a former grow up. Okay, so the grow up, I had a grow up and then I sold the house. Seraph now has taken over the grow up and fixed it. She's then sold it to Julie. Does Julie have to disclose it? If it's a known fact, yeah, you guys are going to have to. You can say it's changed hands 2 times now. It's been remediated. You definitely are going to want to keep good record of, you know, hazmat reports to show that the air quality is good, that there's no mold within the walls, because these are concerns that we all know that come with grow ops, right? There's no mold in the property, you know, it's been like there's fresh drywall, all the necessary precautions have been taken to like fix what's gone wrong with the property. And it's changed hands twice now, so it's becoming an old and older stigma. But if you're aware of it, definitely disclose it. Right.
if we didn't know and sold the house, then we were the seller. So will the RICO come after us that for the stigma, I mean the suicide or murder?
If it's easily discoverable, yeah. Yeah, they will. I'm going to try and go over some newspaper articles here as well with you guys, just to show, because I know sometimes it's really silly. I remember when I was in Oria, we were going over this subject and the class was just hammering our teacher at the time. We were having so much fun with the subject. And one guy says, so if there's a closet to Narnia, do I have to disclose that? Right? You know, like the Lion, Witch in the Wardrobe kind of thing. And she goes, well, yeah, if you think it'll bother someone, sure. Even if you think it's something ridiculous or it's so long ago, it doesn't matter anymore. You have to remember at the end of the day, it's not up to you to decide that. If it bothers this buyer, and I have no idea why it would bother a buyer to live in this house that somebody died in naturally, it would never bother me, right? But you can't make that decision for the buyer. So I'm telling you, the best route to go always is just disclose. Disclose whatever you know, whatever is something easily discoverable about the property. Quick Google search. I ask my client. If my client says, well, you know, they say in that, you know, it's a century home and in the 20s it used to be haunted, right? Maybe, you know, you should just consider disclosing it. I know, like I say before, they say, you know, there's a lot of agents out there who think, oh my God, I'm not going to say that. Like, that's so silly and it might ruin my sale. But the thing is it's really going to ruin your sale after the fact. If you find somebody who purchases it and it happens to be the one person it's going to bother, right? So that kind of goes on to the next one thing that we were talking about. Stigmas are different for different people, right? The relevance and impact of potential stigma or any other such non-physical circumstance will be determined by a buyer's personal values, perceptions, ethnic background, religion, gender, age, and any other individual concerns, right? So it's not up to us to just like decide this. It's up to the person, right? The following questions and responses may demonstrate the difficulty in practical terms of defining a stigma. Would it matter if the death was from natural causes or accidental versus being caused by a violent act or suicide, right? So some people might say, oh, I don't mind if a person died naturally in their property, but you know, if it was a suicide, that would really bother me, right? Would it matter if it was a crib death or an infant? A lot of people don't want to deal with that kind of subjects, right? Would you be as concerned by a death that occurred 20 years ago or a really recent one. So you might say, oh, you know, back in the 20s, this was like a cool place to hang out, and this gangster mobster came in and killed this guy. And that's kind of a cool story from the 20s, but I know that's not going to affect me now in 2021 in this property because they're long gone. That's an old story, old folklore. And, you know, it's not going to affect me now, right? But you still have to disclose it because some people might. These examples illustrate how difficult it is to clearly define what constitutes a stigma. What one person might find completely unacceptable may not be any concern to others, right? All right, disclosures, sellers. It's important for registrants to know, oh, let me just let someone in here. It's important for registrants to know that while sellers are required by law to disclose material latent defects affecting a property that are known to them, an obligation which also exists for seller's representative if the material latent defects is also known by the representative. There is no legislation or case law in Ontario to suggest that a seller or his representative is required to disclose the existence of stigma to buyers. When asked, the seller representative can choose to answer or not. In the latter case, inform the buyer to inquire further. So there is no direct thing by RICO that if you go on RICO's site, it talks a lot about stigmas. They always say best case scenario is disclosure. There's nothing actually written that it says in our laws that yes, you have to disclose the stigma. But the thing is that there's been a few cases back and forth. Like I say, I'll read over a few where things haven't been disclosed. It definitely has bothered the person, and you know the seller and the representative have been at fault. I guess discovered at fault, right? For a buyer, if a registrant is representing a buyer who's concerned about a specific type of stigma, it's highly recommended that the registrant and buyer conduct their own investigation, which could include an internet search and also making direct inquiries of the seller or registrant representing the seller. So if you're working with someone who's really superstitious and every time, you know, they don't want to step on the crack in the sidewalk and like, you know, they're always talking about, you know, knock on wood, and you know, your buyer that you're working with, you definitely want to take an extra layer of precaution. So if you do a Google search and you find out that, you know, this is the property they really like, but, you know, somebody jumped off the roof, then you might want to disclose that to them because that would be something that would bother them. So to further protect your buyer, the registrant could include in any offer a representation warranty regarding the status of the property. For example, the seller represents and warrants that to the best of his or her knowledge and belief, the property has not been the site of a murder. Be specific as to what this is referring to, as what is and what is not a stigma is different to people. So we don't usually put murder in our clause. I'm sure you guys have seen the clause that this has not been the site of an unnatural death, right? We see that clause often because why? The stigma does bother people. It's in our paperwork for a reason. And like I say, even though RICO doesn't have a specific rule dealing with stigmas, it's mostly patent and latent defects. We have that in there because it has been a problem, right? And buyers have been able to recoup something for it not being disclosed to them. So stigma and multiple representation. If a registrant is representing a buyer who is concerned about a specific type, concerned about specific types, the seller does not want to disclose a stigma. Okay, so this is a big one, actually. What do you do if your seller says, okay, you know, it was a grow op. Okay, for instance, this is probably a good one. And the person I bought it from showed me all of this paperwork that it's completely remediated, the air quality is good, and I'm not buying it from the grow op, I'm buying it from the person after. I don't want you to disclose that, okay? So what are you going to do if your seller's absolutely saying you do not disclose this? It kind of becomes a catch-22 now, because like I was saying before, it butts heads with what RICO has to say, because RICO's saying disclose, but RICO also says you don't have to disclose the stigma. So your client says you do not say it. And I normally would turn to my clients and try to tell them the benefits of disclosing it. Well, you know, I think you don't have a lot to worry about. You are the second owner since that grow up. It's been completely remediated. The renos look great. We have all this paperwork to show air quality testing and no presence of mold, no presence of moisture. I think you're fine going forward. And they say, no, I don't want it. Okay, get it in writing that your seller has instructed you not to disclose the stigma, because you're aware right now. So you're just as liable. And now they're telling you not to disclose it. You have to get it in writing from them. Okay. Buyer approached you directly as the listing agent and a customer service representation. You can do that if it's a buyer coming, right? If you have client service representation, now you come into a sticky spot, okay? You have to go back to your sellers. They've made you put in writing that it's not to disclose it. When you have a client service representation, you have full fiduciary obligation to them, meaning you have to disclose to them. So now you put them in a spot. You told your seller in writing that you're not going to disclose it. You can't really take on this multiple representation unless you tell your seller that you have to disclose it to this person now, and they now agree in writing. So you can't take multiple representation. So it's a really sticky situation. If you guys get into this, call me and we'll kind of discuss, because it kind of goes back and forth on whether you should actually be doing this multiple representation. You might want to consider giving it to someone else, or asking that buyer to find another agent. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, can you just repeat that? I didn't.
Okay, so you have a stigma. Okay, so it becomes really difficult to go on and figure out, because patent and latent defects, they're written in REBA, in our act, that we have to disclose them. Okay, they don't specifically cover stigmas, because stigmas are such a, it doesn't bother the person, does it not bother the person. They don't specifically say that we have to disclose them. But funnily enough, there's been case studies where they haven't disclosed there's been a death, or it's been a grow up or something to that effect, and we've gotten in trouble for it, right, as agents. So we have to be careful going forward, because there's, like I say, there's a reason we have those clauses saying that this hasn't been a grow up, or there hasn't been an unnatural death. Okay, even though we're not, as per REBA, we're not required to. Okay, now you find a seller, and your seller says do not disclose it. Okay, if you do not disclose it, you're in trouble. You're now aware. Get it from your client that you're not going to be disclosing this, right, in writing, as per his request. In a multiple representation situation, if you take on a client to purchase the property, now you're in a really sticky situation, because, and it's happened before, that's why we're going over it. You have a full fiduciary obligation to them to disclose everything, because they're now your client. Okay, so what do you do in this case? You have two choices. You can go back to your seller and say, hey, I have to disclose this, and get it in writing from them that you can now disclose it, or you cannot take on that client. Okay. So again, so it just says here, notify the seller of this buyer and your obligation to them, right? Seller can decide not to accept multiple representation, right? Inform buyer to seek alternative representation, or accept customer service. So customer service is just saying to them, hey, I can write up the contract for you, but I can't disclose everything to you about the property, and I can't offer you full fiduciary responsibility on my part. I can't, do my complete due diligence for you, which is a rare person. You'll find that will just go, okay, yeah, fine, write up the contract. So I'll just stop the share here for a second. We went over quite a lot there for a little bit. Have you guys ever come across these situations where you've had these disclosures between patent and latent defects, or different things like grow ops? I'm sure you guys have come across some grow ops, or you ever had an offer that has had, the unnatural death clause in it, or the grow up clause in it? Have you had clients that have been concerned about this? No? Well, like I say, just caution going forward. If you have any of these deals, you guys are welcome to call me and ask my opinion. But like I say, the best thing at the end of the day is put your clauses in there, and full disclosure if it's your listings, right? You guys all know how to add like a disclosure to the property, right? You can add it as an attachment at the top of your listing. If not, you guys can call me when you're loading anything, and I can help you walk you through that. I also had a really interesting website I came across once that I'll share with you guys. Aside from a Google search, you can go to housecreep.com. It discloses murders and other serious occurrences that may have taken place in the home. So it's just an interesting site. You can go on and check it out. There's so many famous stories out there, like, they were talking about Bernardo and Homolka, and when she was getting released, there was a big, I'm sure you guys remember, there was it was all over the news. Well, where was she going to live, and what city did she want to end up in? And, people were protesting because they didn't want her to end up in their neighborhood. Right. So this is a big thing. So it's not only like we say, murders and grow ups and ghosts and stuff like that. It can be notorious people. Even politicians, for instance, say there's a politician that's really hated and he's targeted right now, and everybody knows that he's in danger, right? Because he's really being targeted for whatever his beliefs are, his political campaign is right now. They might not want him in the neighborhood. That might be something you have to disclose, that, oh, do you know that so-and-so lives in this neighborhood? Because other people might be bothered by it. I remember that you guys have to, oh, this is definitely one. You guys have to be careful that it's not only the property you're selling. Okay, so I have an example from my last office, and this was a big problem, and it went to RICO. Okay, one of our agents had sold a property in Brampton. Okay, and the buyer moved in, and the buyer was really upset after, because they found out from the neighbors that the house across the street had all these drug dealers in it, and they had a big bust. And you know, they had been like taken out, and now the property was kind of like a little bit disheveled, right? So why would this affect? It's not the property that the person purchased, right? Why would I be concerned about this as an agent? So you have to understand that this would bother some people, that even though it's not the actual property they purchased, the crime has still happened in the neighborhood close enough that these people were concerned. And they went and they were able to actually, I forget whether it was right after they closed or right before they were closing, they were able to back out of the deal, because the seller had not disclosed that there was a crime. The purchaser, the agent, the co-op agent had not done their due diligence to find out it was a crime. And this really, really bothered the purchaser. Why would it bother a purchaser? You know what I mean? You think, why would it bother? But they were concerned that there might be crime activity in the neighborhood, that people might still be coming and going in that property. And not only that, going forward, the property looked disheveled and it didn't look nice. So maybe while you're doing showings, it's a good idea to look around. And if there's anything that concerns you, you might do a little research. Even if it's across the street, you might want to check and see what's going on with that property, right? All right, I'm just going to go to this article here for a moment and see if we can go over a couple of things. So caveat emptor, buyer beware. You guys can all see this, right? And the article goes through mostly what I went through already, like the definitions of patent and latent defects, you know what I mean? Our obligations as realtors and our sellers, right? See, we talk about fairness, honesty. We have to treat every person the register deals with within the course of the trade of real estate fairly, honestly, and with integrity. So we have to remember that if you feel like you're hiding something, it's probably something that you should disclose, right? If it's something that worries you. Okay. So we have a couple of examples in this article, which is why I like to pull it up. The case of Krawchuk and Sherbak, right, is a prime example of when a realtor might be held responsible for not being candid and upfront with purchasers. Facts. The sellers were aware of plumbing issues with the house, but responded to no on the question whether there were any issues with the plumbing on the seller property information statement, the SPIS. The buyer was provided a copy with the SPIS and relied on it when purchasing the property. The sellers were also aware that the house had issues with the foundation settling. Despite this fact, they told their real estate agent that the house had not faced any settling issues for 17 years. That information was not questioned by the agent, but simply conveyed by the agent to the buyer. So the Court of Appeal agreed with the trial judge with respect to the seller's negligence, but due to the actions and inactions by the agent, the court also extended the liability to the agent. The court used the due diligence requirements found in the Real Estate Council of Ontario's Code of Ethics to establish the agent's standard of care. So see, they're relying on our due diligence and our standard of care to discover these facts. And at this point, the agents asked them to fill out an SPIS, right? But it concluded, that the agent should have been apprehensive about the information provided by the sellers. In this case, the agent knew about the home's history of settlement problems and could also have discovered signs of problems through the agent's visual inspection of the property. So they're relying on our knowledge at the end of the day. As an agent, you have to be really cautious. You can't claim stupid on a lot of things because they expect us to know, right? Those factors should have prompted the agent to verify the accuracy of the seller's statements. A key factor in this case was the fact that the agent acted on both sides. So again, multiple representation. It may sound great, we're getting both sides of the commission, but very, very tricky situation. Ultimately, the court decided to apportion 50% fault to both the seller and the agent. The finding against the agent was justified by the court because the agent assisted the sellers in filling out the SPIS and should have informed the sellers about the implications of misrepresenting information on the SPIS, right? So they were saying that they could see that there was upon a visual inspection, you could see there's a problem with the foundation. We aren't home inspectors at the end of the day, but the law comes down on us hard because as real estate agents, they're expecting us to know our industry and to be aware of certain things, right? So it's kind of like, you know, the coach doesn't actually play basketball or hockey with the team. They're not physically playing, but they should know everything that's going on, right? Because they're the ones coaching. So we're coaching our clients, our sellers and our buyers through this process. We have to be aware. So for instance, you know, I always ask my clients when selling in East York, what are common problem that we know in East York? Termites, right? So I don't just automatically look, even if it looks like it's a brick or a concrete foundation, I still ask, hey, is there any termites? No. Have you had it recently inspected or sprayed? No. Are you aware that your street's been sprayed? No. Do you mind if we pay for a termite inspection before we list this property, just so we can prove that there's not a problem, right? So you guys should just be aware of certain problems, especially working in certain areas. If you're working in certain areas, like for instance, Port Hope had a big contamination problem, right? You have to know the areas you're working in and you have to do your due diligence to do your research. Because if your clients are filling out, especially if they're filling out SPIS reports, you have to be extremely careful. Okay, I just want to read this one more before we finish up here and then let you guys ask any questions. In another case, Savidal and Chopra, the sellers of a house knew at the time of agreement of purchase and sale was entered into of the existence of radioactive material in the area and did not disclose it to the purchasers. The judge found that the amount of radioactive material was sufficient to be considered a potential risk and hazard, and although not an immediate risk or danger, amounted to potential danger. The sellers had a duty to disclose to the purchasers the potential danger to the property, even though the radioactive material was in the immediate area, but not known to be on the actual property in question. So this is like that house in Brampton I was talking about with the crime. It doesn't have to deal with the actual house that you're selling or buying. It's just the area around. You have to be aware of the neighborhoods and the areas that you're selling, right? In conclusion, it's always important to know what your role is as a seller and an agent to disclose material facts and to know what your disclosure obligations are. And then they just talk about a couple simple tips we can go forward, but that's all that pretty much covers what I was covering before. So there have been I have other articles I can share with you guys. We're going to run out of time now, but you know, where RICO has turned around and you guys will get fined if you're found to be not disclosing or hiding patent and latent defects or stigmas. So you guys really have to be cautious about it. Have you guys come across any of this? Or even as a purchaser, have you ever gone through with a client and thought, there seems to be a problem here? I'm dealing with one right now, actually, and I don't think that my purchasers are going to go ahead and purchase the property, which is kind of sad. So I'm dealing with property in East York, and we walk downstairs and there's a humidifier, and right away, you know, that's a telltale sign. I'm like, why? A dehumidifier. Why is there a dehumidifier? So they said to me, oh, well, because, you know, we have a pre-inspection report. You can see there's no problem really with the basement. The inspection report on one page says that the parging is fresh and we do not think that renovating the basement is advisable, right? Huge back out for my clients because they want to finish the basement, right? So I've tried everything to do my due diligence. I got the home inspector's number. I called him. He said, you know, it was raining a lot that week and the parging was fresh. And I'll always say that there's no point in finishing it because of the moisture issue in the basement. It hasn't actually been waterproofed yet. I went to the contractor. I went and got all the receipts for everything he did. We went forward. We even called a contractor to show them the report and say, hey, what would you do if you had to renovate this basement, right? And we're just sort of discovering that there is a dig. It is a dig that's going to have to be done to the house. And we're not really sure the cost is going to fall into my buyer's hands, right? But it's better for me to lose this, keep this client, and go forward and purchase something else, as much as it sucks that you worked on this a little bit, because I don't want to say to my clients, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. They fixed it. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. They put a beautiful renovation in the basement and I turn around and 8 months from now, you know, or less than that, you know, when fall hits, all of a sudden it's raining like mad and their brand new basement is getting ruined, right? I'm definitely going to lose a lot of commission fast that way if something like that were to happen. So it's better just to take it with a grain of salt, take your lumps and move on, even though it sucks. And I have to go back out and try and find them something else now, right? What else is going on with you guys and your buyers? What about you guys? How do you guys feel about stigmas? Like if someone were to tell you it's a haunted house or somebody committed a suicide there, is it something that would bother you guys? I remember, again, another instance when I was in Oria, we were talking about this, and it was a different teacher, and somehow we got into the subject, and he said to me, you know, I don't know why it bothers people. He was right across the road where someone was working on their car and had gotten killed somehow. There was an accident that happened. He was under the car or something. And he had a house across the road that wasn't as big and as nice as that one. And he said, you know, as callous as it is, he was kind of jumping for joy going, oh, I bet you I can get that house for cheaper now. So you have the people who are like, oh no, I would never buy it. And then the people who see it as a good opportunity, right?
Because
Sorry.
I was gonna say, some people when they see defects or stigmas or something, it's like a bulb goes off in their head because they start figuring out how much they can like get it cheaper or something, you know, and I feel like even if it doesn't bother them, they'll start complaining about it so that you can, you know, they'll be like, oh, but it's haunted. Like, how will I ever live here? You know, like maybe I could live here if it was 100K cheaper.
Exactly.
Like,
No, some people will use it to their advantage as a negotiation tactic for sure. For sure. If it doesn't bother you, then what does it matter, right? At the end of the day. So
might as well, you know, whine yourself.
For sure, for sure. No, I don't know if you guys know, at Birchmount and St. Clair, there's a cemetery, right? And I had a client who put an offer in. Mind you, it was a bid situation and we didn't win. And it was the house right across from the cemetery. And I kid you not, it's 666 Birchmount. So I know like some people would go, are you kidding me? 666 number of a house and right across from a cemetery. But you guys will drive by now. I hope you remember my story. Every time you drive by 666 Birchmount right at Birchmount and St. Clair there. And I know some people would say, forget about it. Are you kidding me? But this guy was trying to put a bid in and he was so mad he lost it. He's like, oh, I could get this house for a cheap price. You know what I mean? So some people, it just doesn't bother at the end of the day.
Birchmount and what?
Birchmount and St. Clair, right across from Pine Hill Cemetery, is 666 Birchmount. And it was like a number of years ago now, like, oh, I lose my dates here. Like maybe if you look at the last sale on there, maybe like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Yeah, but crazy, crazy, crazy. Do you guys ever think like, you know,
2014.
Oh, was it 2014 already? Oh, see, there you go. 7 years. I told you it's a while. But yeah, definitely. My client had a bid on that property and we totally lost. And I'm thinking, people are fighting over this. Why are we fighting over 666 Birchmount, right? You know, they say like certain numbers go faster, like the 8s go faster and the 4s don't. It all depends on people's superstition. You know, we used to leave 13s. We leave a lot of 13s out of the floors and buildings. And I was chatting with the garden series, and I guess they're catering to the Chinese community because they're superstitious of 4. That garden series building that we're selling right now is not going to have a 4th floor on it. Right?
When you do that though,
for me, 4 doesn't bug me. I'd live on the 4th floor, but I guess they're catering to that sort of community, right? So,
right. But when you do that, it's like, okay, so doesn't the 14th floor just become the 13th?
See, I've always said this now. I'm like, you know, they don't have a 13th floor, but technically the 14th is the 13th floor, right? They just don't number it that.
Storage or something. Like they should still like
use it, yeah, for something.
Else I mean,
you would think for sure. But yeah, like I say, some people it bothers and some people it does not. So anyways, do you guys have any questions for me this morning? There's always a fun subject to cover because when you get into the stigmas, I know it always turns into a good discussion.
What is a condemned property?
A condemned property? It depends. Like usually a condemned property is one that you can't live in. So if you say the city condemns it, right? It means that it's like structurally not okay or unsafe, uninhabitable for some reason.
But what about the ones that are under eminent domain or something like?
Like what do you mean?
Like when it's when let's say you're the only person left in that neighborhood that still owns that house, like everybody else has moved out, and like the government wants to, because they want to use
They want to
this-
build it.
Yeah, build like a building or whatever shopping mall there now, so can they force you, like, can they declare your property condemned to make you move out, like,
It depends on how dilapidated it is, I guess. They could, yeah, they could find sneaky ways to do that. I don't think
because
they
some
can
people, it's
physically
like not
kick you
about
out.
the money, they just don't want to move,
Yeah,
like, they
no.
just, they don't want to move.
And they don't care how much
They
the
don't care,
builders
they don't
offer
care.
them.
They
Yeah,
want to die in that house.
for
like-
sure, for sure. So yeah, no, it's definitely a difficult situation. So everybody good this morning though? I think the next time we're going to train is verbal communication to buyer seller treat as disclosure. So yeah, you can, it is disclosure. You are disclosing it to them. Okay. But say going forward, somebody says, hey, Paul, you didn't tell me. How are you going to prove it? How are you going to prove that? Yeah, no, you did disclose it to them. That's why I say I always try to take a quick layer of texting it to my clients or emailing it to my clients, or if you disclose it to them, make sure you put it in the agreement of purchase and sale, whether you're the seller or the buyer, and you put a clause in saying that if you disclose to them that it was a grow op, right? You could say the seller has disclosed to the buyer that this property was a former grow op in whatever, 2014 or something, or the buyer is aware through disclosure that this property was a former grow op. So verbal is always tricky these days because people are dishonest, you know, unfortunately, and they'll say, oh, you never told me. And how are you going to prove that it's, you know, he said, she said. So it's definitely a tricky situation. Reducing it to writing is always the best way to go. And I always find different ways to do that. Like I find with Authenticign, be really careful with Authenticign these days because it's so easy for you to send documents to your clients. They don't pay attention. They just go click, 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 signed, right? I always send the Authenticign and then I'll send my clients a text, and I could probably find one because I was doing one last night there. You know, on my phone, I'll say, email sent for e-signature. Please let me know if you'd like me to call you and walk you through the document. Right? Because they can't turn around and then say, I just clicked it. I didn't know I was signing. They never explained it to me. They never offered. What are you talking about? I'll say, no. I definitely said to my client, hey, can I help you? Can I walk you through this document? Do you have any questions? Right? Text is proof. Yeah, for sure. It's writing. If you text to your clients, you can't say that they didn't know, right? That you didn't tell them, especially if they respond to you. If they respond to that text, for sure. They might say, oh, I never saw the text, but that's kind of a really weak argument when it's sitting on their phone or in your phone, right? So.
Also when it says seen.
When it says seen or read, you know what I mean? But some people take off their red now, and I don't know, it drives me nuts, so.
That's why you have Instagram.
Yeah, I know. Everybody good?
Everyone needs an iPhone and
Everybody needs, yeah, it depends. Argue that with my house. I'm the only iPhone, and me and my daughter, the rest are all Samsung, so.
Really?
Yeah.
How does that work?
I don't know. So everybody good this morning though? So yeah, I was going to say training will be Tuesday next. We're going to skip this Thursday only because it's my son's birthday. So I won't be here in the evening, but we'll resume again two trainings next week. So Tuesday morning, I'll see you guys with the next subject. We have an exciting week next week. I have a guest speaker coming to talk to us about funding investment properties from Centum Mortgages. So that's going to be happening on Thursday. Tuesday morning will be my regular training, and Thursday we'll have a guest speaker. Awesome. All right, guys, you have a lovely morning. It looks like it's still sunny out there. I can see outside of it. Enjoy. If you have any questions, let me know, especially if it's about patent and latent defects or disclosures or stigmas. Come to me before you write up your offers. All right, everyone, have a good, lovely Tuesday. Talk to you guys soon.